When method acting meets authentic danger, the results can shatter everything you believe about toughness. You're about to witness the moment when Hollywood's most intense young actor learned that all his street research meant nothing against someone who operated in territories that existed beyond method, beyond acting, beyond anything he could study or prepare for. Subscribe to discover more untold stories of when systematic preparation met supernatural reality and got obliterated in ways that redefined everything. The Notebook fell from Robert De Niro's trembling hands, its pages of meticulously researched street authenticity scattering across the Columbia Pictures floor like the fragments of a shattered worldview. At 28 years old and deep in preparation for what would become his most iconic role, De Niro stood frozen on the soundstage, staring at Sammy Davis Jr. with the expression of someone whose entire understanding of danger, toughness, and authentic menace had just been obliterated by a demonstration that operated beyond anything method acting could analyze or comprehend. What had just happened on that March afternoon in 1971 wasn't just an impressive display of speed. It was the moment when Hollywood's most methodical actor discovered that real danger could make his systematic approach to toughness look like amateur psychology, delivered by someone who never needed to research authenticity because he embodied it at levels that transcended human understanding. Sammy Davis Jr., at 46 years old, calmly straightened his cufflinks and looked at the devastated De Niro with an expression that mixed genuine sympathy with the quiet amusement of someone who had just provided the most brutal education in authentic menace that the entertainment industry had ever witnessed. This is the untold story of the day when method acting met supernatural capability, when systematic preparation encountered transcendent mastery, and when 0.1 seconds redefined what authentic danger looked like when it operated beyond the reach of research, analysis, or dramatic technique. March 1971 at Columbia Pictures represented Robert De Niro at the absolute beginning of what would become legendary intensity and systematic approach to character development. At 28, he had already earned recognition as the most methodical young actor of his generation, someone whose commitment to authentic preparation exceeded anything previous performers had attempted. De Niro's approach to every role was based on comprehensive research, systematic immersion, and the kind of methodical preparation that convinced him he could authentically portray any character through sufficient study and systematic application of proper technique. He spent months researching backgrounds, analyzing psychological profiles, and developing systematic methodologies for achieving authentic performance through intellectual preparation, which is why he was so confident in his ability to understand and portray authentic toughness through systematic research and methodical character development, particularly when it came to roles that required genuine menace and authentic danger. The confrontation began during preparation for what would eventually become, quote, Taxi Driver, though at this stage De Niro was conducting general research into authentic urban toughness and street-level danger. He had been spending weeks studying real tough guys, analyzing their mannerisms, and developing systematic approaches to portraying genuine menace through methodical character work. The problem with entertainers like Sammy, De Niro was explaining to a group of directors, acting coaches, and industry professionals, is that they approach toughness as performance rather than authentic psychological state. They can simulate danger for entertainment purposes, but they don't understand what real menace actually feels like from the inside. His commentary was delivered with the intense conviction that characterized everything he did, but it was based on the assumption that systematic research and methodical preparation could provide access to authentic psychological states that performers like Sammy could only approximate through theatrical technique. Real danger, De Niro continued, comes from understanding the psychological mechanisms that create authentic menace. Most performers learn to look threatening on camera, but they don't comprehend the internal processes that generate genuine intimidation and real fear. Sammy was nearby, reviewing arrangements for a variety special that would feature several major stars in different segments designed to showcase their individual talents and capabilities. De Niro's commentary was clearly intended to be overheard and to establish hierarchies of authenticity that placed method actors above entertainers in terms of genuine understanding of complex psychological states. I mean, look at Sammy's approach to any role that requires toughness, De Niro said, raising his voice slightly to ensure his target could hear the assessment. Natural charm, entertainment value, professional competence. But when it comes to authentic danger, real menace, genuine intimidation, we're talking about completely different categories of psychological preparation. Sammy looked up from his script notes, recognizing De Niro's deliberate provocation, and walked over to where De Niro was conducting his impromptu seminar on authentic toughness and systematic character development. "Bobby," Sammy said pleasantly, "I couldn't help but overhear your analysis of authentic menace versus theatrical approximation. It sounds like you've developed quite sophisticated methodologies for accessing genuine psychological states." De Niro smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose intellectual superiority had been properly acknowledged by a fellow performer, completely missing the subtle irony in Sammy's diplomatic language. "I have," De Niro replied with obvious intensity. "The thing that separates method acting from surface performance is systematic access to authentic psychological states through comprehensive research and methodical preparation. Most performers rely on external imitation, but genuine authenticity requires understanding the internal mechanisms." Sammy nodded thoughtfully, as if receiving valuable educational information about the superiority of systematic methodology over natural ability. "That's a fascinating approach," Sammy said. "Very comprehensive psychological framework." He paused, maintaining his characteristic diplomatic politeness. "Though I wonder if there might be different definitions of what authentic danger actually looks like when it operates beyond psychological analysis." De Niro interpreted Sammy's response as evidence that the entertainer was interested in learning about genuine authenticity from someone who possessed legitimate credentials in systematic character development and methodical psychological preparation. "There's really only one definition that matters from a professional standpoint," De Niro said, with the conviction of someone who had never encountered capabilities that challenged his methodological frameworks. "Authentic internal access to genuine psychological states that produce measurable external results. That's what separates real acting from superficial entertainment." Sammy's expression suggested that he found De Niro's analysis intellectually interesting, but perhaps not complete in its understanding of how authentic danger actually functioned. "So you're saying that genuine menace should be judged through systematic psychological authenticity rather than practical capability?" Sammy asked. "Exactly," De Niro confirmed. "Any performer can learn to look intimidating through external technique. But authentic danger comes from actually accessing the internal psychological states that create genuine menace through systematic preparation and methodical character work." The assessment carried clear implications about De Niro's evaluation of Sammy's capabilities, that any impressive results he might achieve would represent theatrical approximation rather than authentic psychological access to genuine danger. Sammy considered De Niro's philosophy with the thoughtful attention he gave to most intellectual discussions. "That makes sense from a methodical perspective," Sammy agreed. "Very logical framework for distinguishing between different approaches to authenticity." He maintained his pleasant expression while continuing. "Of course, that assumes that psychological preparation represents the highest level of authentic danger, rather than just one approach among many." De Niro looked puzzled by the suggestion that there might be approaches to authentic menace that existed outside systematic psychological methodology. "What do you mean?" "Well," Sammy said, "what if there are levels of authentic danger that transcend the need for psychological preparation entirely? What if real menace means making methodical analysis irrelevant rather than applying it systematically?" De Niro's methodical pride engaged immediately, sensing that this conversation was moving toward territory where he could demonstrate the superiority of systematic psychological preparation through direct comparison with theatrical approximation. "Are you suggesting that surface performance can produce results superior to systematic psychological authenticity?" De Niro asked, his voice carrying the intense conviction of someone explaining obvious principles to a less intellectually sophisticated individual. I'm suggesting we might want to test our different approaches under practical conditions, Sammy replied with characteristic diplomatic politeness. The suggestion created immediate excitement among the assembled studio personnel, who recognized that they were about to witness either a confirmation of methodical preparation over natural ability or a discovery that would challenge fundamental assumptions about the relationship between systematic acting technique and authentic capability. De Niro was delighted by the prospect of demonstrating the superiority of systematic psychological preparation in front of an audience that included several influential directors and acting coaches. This was exactly the kind of methodical validation opportunity that reinforced his reputation as someone whose approach to performance was based on rigorous psychological authenticity rather than superficial entertainment technique. "What kind of test?" De Niro asked, though he was already confident that systematic preparation would prove superior to whatever theatrical approach Sammy might attempt. "Simple demonstration," Sammy said. "Since you mentioned the importance of accessing authentic psychological states, maybe we should see which approach produces more genuinely intimidating results." Word of the impromptu challenge spread quickly through the soundstage, and within minutes a substantial crowd had gathered to witness what most assumed would be an educational demonstration of methodical acting technique proving superior to entertainment performance. A technical coordinator appeared with prop weapons that had been prepared for Western-themed segments in various productions. De Niro immediately began conducting comprehensive psychological preparation, accessing internal states, and explaining the methodical processes that would govern his systematic approach to authentic menace. Authentic intimidation requires accessing genuine psychological states through systematic preparation. De Niro explained to the assembled observers as he conducted his methodical character work. Most performers approach this externally and hope surface technique will produce adequate results, but genuine menace requires internal psychological authenticity. Sammy watched De Niro's extensive preparation with polite interest, but made no move to conduct similar psychological analysis or access systematic internal states. He remained in his characteristic relaxed posture, looking like someone attending a methodical lecture rather than preparing to participate in serious competition. De Niro spent nearly 15 minutes accessing psychological states, analyzing character motivations, and explaining the systematic processes that governed his methodical approach to achieving authentic menace through comprehensive internal preparation. "The difference between method acting and surface performance," De Niro continued his lecture, "is that systematic psychology produces genuine authenticity based on real internal access, while theatrical approaches rely on external approximation that can't achieve comparable psychological depth." Sammy accepted standard equipment from the technical coordinator and adjusted it with casual attention, as if he were putting on regular clothing rather than preparing specialized equipment for competitive demonstration of different methodological approaches to authentic danger. "Aren't you going to access the appropriate psychological states?" De Niro asked, noting Sammy's apparent lack of systematic preparation. "I think I'll be fine," Sammy replied, checking his reflection in a nearby mirror with the same casual attention he gave to most routine grooming activities. De Niro looked at Sammy's relaxed approach to what he considered serious methodical competition, with the expression of someone who was beginning to understand that this would be more educational than competitive. A Columbia Pictures assistant director volunteered to oversee the demonstration, setting up professional timing equipment and establishing rules that would ensure objective measurement of systematic psychological preparation versus theatrical performance. "Standard quick draw," the assistant director announced. "Methodical authenticity against entertainment technique. We'll see which approach produces more genuinely intimidating results." "Ready," the assistant director called. De Niro took his methodically calculated stance, every element positioned according to psychological principles and systematic character work. His preparation represented months of research applied to achieve authentic menace through comprehensive methodical development. Sammy remained in his characteristic casual posture, showing no signs of systematic psychological preparation or methodical character work. His approach suggested someone who was participating in a friendly demonstration rather than serious methodical competition. "Draw," the assistant director commanded. What happened next created one of the most talked-about moments in Columbia Pictures history and established a new understanding of what authentic danger looked like when it operated beyond the boundaries of psychological methodology and entered territory that challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between preparation and genuine capability. De Niro's draw was methodically perfect, systematically executed, and psychologically authentic. His speed of 0.17 seconds demonstrated everything that rigorous preparation and systematic character work could achieve when applied by someone with genuine commitment to methodical excellence. But Sammy Davis Jr. had already drawn, aimed, fired, and holstered his weapon while lighting a cigarette and checking his watch, all in 0.11 seconds that belonged in the realm of supernatural capability rather than human achievement, accomplished with such casual precision that he appeared to be demonstrating natural reflexes rather than accessing psychological states. De Niro stood frozen, his weapon only partially drawn, staring at Sammy with the expression of someone whose methodical worldview had just been obliterated by evidence that authentic danger could transcend psychological preparation entirely and operate according to principles that exceeded systematic understanding. The assembled crowd remained silent for over 2 minutes, trying to process what they had witnessed. Several acting coaches actually checked their timing equipment multiple times, thinking the measurements had to reflect some kind of systematic error. De Niro was the first to speak, and his words carried the bewilderment of someone whose methodical framework had just encountered something that challenged every psychological principle he understood. "That's not possible according to psychological analysis," De Niro said, his voice rising toward methodical desperation. "The preparation time, the character work, the systematic access to authentic internal states, none of that supports what I just witnessed." Sammy took a contemplative drag from his freshly lit cigarette and looked at De Niro with the patient expression of someone who had just provided a lesson in the difference between methodical understanding and authentic capability. "Different approach," Sammy said with his characteristic understatement. But De Niro's analytical mind was struggling to process the implications of what had happened from both psychological and methodical perspectives. "Show me that again," De Niro demanded, his systematic curiosity overwhelming his personal devastation. "I need to understand the methodology you're applying to access those psychological states." The second demonstration was even more impossible. 0.10 seconds of precision that exceeded anything in psychological literature, accomplished while Sammy maintained casual conversation with the director about lunch plans and completely ignored the supposedly serious business of accessing authentic internal states. De Niro attempted his own follow-up draw, applying maximum systematic preparation and methodical character work. But the more intensely he focused on psychological authenticity, the more his performance deteriorated rather than improved. "I don't understand," De Niro said finally, his voice carrying the confusion of someone whose systematic expertise had been revealed as irrelevant to authentic capability. "Everything I know about psychology, character development, and methodical preparation says that what you're doing shouldn't be achievable without systematic internal access." Sammy's explanation revealed not just superior capability, but access to authenticity that existed outside De Niro's entire methodical framework for understanding character development and psychological preparation. "Bobby, you've approached danger like a psychologist," Sammy said, his tone carrying genuine respect for De Niro's systematic efforts. "You've analyzed every internal state, understood every character motivation, and developed methodical processes for achieving authentic results. That's impressive psychological work." He gestured toward De Niro's systematically prepared approach and methodical character development. "But I approach danger like breathing, not by accessing it through preparation, but by making it so natural that preparation becomes unnecessary." De Niro listened with the fascination of someone discovering that his area of methodical expertise contained dimensions that existed beyond psychological analysis entirely. "When capability becomes natural enough," Sammy continued, "systematic methodology actually becomes counterproductive. The authenticity operates best when it's allowed to function automatically, rather than when it's controlled through psychological preparation." The explanation was philosophically devastating for De Niro. who was beginning to understand that his methodical approach represented not advancement but limitation, compared to authenticity that transcended psychological methodology entirely. "You're saying that my systematic psychological preparation actually interferes with authentic danger?" De Niro asked, his voice carrying the horror of someone whose methodical life's work had just been revealed as fundamentally counterproductive. "I'm saying that different levels of authenticity require different approaches," Sammy replied diplomatically. "But the highest levels might be about transcending methodology, rather than perfecting it." De Niro stood quietly for several minutes, trying to process the implications of what he had witnessed and learned. His reputation as Hollywood's most methodical young actor had just encountered evidence that systematic preparation might represent limitations rather than advantages when it came to authentic capability. The conversation that followed revealed the depth of De Niro's methodical crisis and his struggle to understand how everything he had believed about psychological preparation and systematic character work could have been so fundamentally incomplete. "Sammy," De Niro said finally, his voice carrying a humility that was completely uncharacteristic for one of Hollywood's most intensely confident young performers. "Yeah, Bobby? I think I need to reconsider what authentic preparation actually means," De Niro said. "Because what you just demonstrated suggests that real danger operates beyond psychological methodology entirely." Sammy accepted the acknowledgement with characteristic grace. "Different approaches work for different people, Bobby. Systematic preparation produces genuine understanding and authentic results. It's just that some capabilities might require moving beyond understanding into more natural territory." But De Niro's methodical ego was struggling to accommodate the revelation that his celebrated systematic approach represented intermediate-level methodology compared to authenticity that transcended psychological frameworks entirely. The psychological impact of having his methodical worldview so completely challenged created a crisis that would influence his approach to character development for the rest of his career. Over the following years, De Niro's approach to his roles became notably less systematically analytical and more intuitively natural. Industry insiders observed that his encounter with Sammy had taught him the limitations of methodical preparation when it came to authentic capability that operated beyond psychological analysis. "Bobby was never quite the same after that day," noted one veteran acting coach. "He was still intense, still methodical, still committed to authentic preparation. But he stopped believing that systematic analysis was the only path to authentic results, and that actually made his performances more naturally powerful." The incident became legendary among entertainment professionals as an example of how authentic capability could transcend methodical preparation without diminishing the value of systematic character work for those still developing their craft. Years later, when De Niro was asked about the most important lesson of his career, he would often reference that afternoon at Columbia as the day he learned the difference between preparing for authenticity and naturally being authentic. "Sammy taught me that the highest level of authentic performance is about transcending the need for systematic preparation," De Niro explained during a rare interview in the 1980s. "I had been trying to perfect my methodical approach to everything, but he showed me that real authenticity makes methodology irrelevant." The 0.11 seconds had lasted only an instant, but the methodical humility it created would last for decades, proving that sometimes the most valuable education comes from having your systematic certainties challenged by someone whose authenticity operates according to principles that exceed psychological understanding. And in Hollywood, where methodical preparation was often more valued than natural capability, De Niro's willingness to acknowledge superior authenticity and learn from it actually enhanced his reputation as a thoughtful performer, rather than damaging his credibility as a systematic actor. Robert De Niro had entered that soundstage as one of Hollywood's most methodically rigorous young performers, but he left understanding that real authenticity wasn't about perfecting psychological methodology. It was about developing such natural capability that systematic frameworks became irrelevant to genuine achievement.